The 8-year-old boy clung to her bloody uniform and whispered, "I'll be brave, miss." She carried him 200 meters through hell with 67 bullet wounds. 10 years later, that boy found her again, and this time she needed to save him one more time. The compound walls shook with each explosion. Dust rained from the ceiling as Staff Sergeant Jessica Walker pressed herself against the sandbag barrier, her M4 carbine hot in her hands. 27 years old, Delta Force operator, and at this moment, the only thing standing between 73 terrified civilians and 300 Taliban fighters surrounding the compound. Her 4 teammates were dead. She'd watched them fall in the first 15 minutes of the ambush. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, who'd promised to buy her a beer when they got home. Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, who'd shown her pictures of his newborn daughter that morning. Corporal David Hayes and Private First Class Jake Morrison, all gone in explosions of dust and blood. The intel had been catastrophically wrong. Light resistance, they'd said. Minimal enemy presence. Instead, it had been a slaughter. Jessica's tactical vest was heavy with ammunition, but she could feel it running low. Blood seeped through her left shoulder where shrapnel had torn through. Her right thigh burned where a bullet had grazed. Her ears rang from constant explosions. But inside the compound's main building, 73 aid workers and their families huddled in terror. Teachers, doctors, translators, people who'd come to Afghanistan to help, now trapped in a war zone, and among them, 2 children who would change everything. If this story of unbreakable bonds and a promise kept across a decade already has you emotional, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What happens when this soldier returns from the dead will restore your faith in humanity. Your support helps me bring you more incredible stories of heroes who never give up. Now let's go back to that Afghan compound where a promise was made that would echo across 10 years. Rasheed was 8 years old, with enormous brown eyes and dust covering his traditional Afghan clothes. His 6-year-old sister, Amira, lay in his arms, her leg wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage from a bullet wound. She whimpered in pain, but Rasheed held her close, whispering comfort in Pashto. When the adults had tried to separate them, to tend to Amira's wound in another room, Rasheed had refused. He'd planted himself like a tree, small arms wrapped around his sister. "I stay with Amira," he'd said in careful English. "I promised Mama, I stay." Their mother had died in the initial attack. Their father, a translator who'd worked with U.S. forces, had been killed by the Taliban 6 months earlier. These children had nothing left but each other. Jessica had seen them during her runs between defensive positions. Each time she passed the makeshift shelter, she'd meet Rasheed's eyes. And each time the boy would nod at her, a gesture of trust from someone too young to understand the odds they faced. The sun was setting. They'd been under siege for 8 hours. Jessica's ammunition was nearly gone. Her radio had taken a bullet an hour ago. The extraction helicopters that were supposed to arrive at noon had been driven back by heavy fire. They were alone. Night fell, and the Taliban attacks intensified. They knew time was on their side. No resupply, no reinforcements. Just one American soldier and a compound full of soft targets. Jessica moved like a ghost through the compound, firing from different positions to make them think there were more defenders. She used every trick she'd learned in training. Conserved ammunition, made every shot count, used psychological warfare, shouting commands in different voices to create the illusion of multiple operators. Hour 9. She took a bullet to her right arm. Kept shooting left-handed. Hour 11. Shrapnel from an RPG peppered her back. She felt the warm blood, kept moving. Hour 13. A ricochet caught her left leg. She tied it off with a torn sleeve, returned fire. The civilians watched in awe and terror as this small woman, bleeding, exhausted, running on pure will, held off an army. Some prayed, some wept, some tried to help, bringing her water, ammunition from fallen defenders, but it was Rasheed who became her shadow. "Miss," he'd whispered during a lull in the fighting, tugging on her bloody vest, "Amira is scared. Can you promise? Promise we go home?" Jessica had looked at this child, his sister dying in his arms, his world destroyed, still trying to be brave, and something in her chest broke and hardened at the same time. She knelt down, eye level with him, and placed her hand on his small shoulder. "I promise, Rasheed, I'll get you home, both of you. I promise I'll always watch over you." The boy had nodded, satisfied, and returned to his sister's side. That promise became Jessica's anchor through the remaining hours, when exhaustion threatened to pull her under, when blood loss made her vision blur, when every muscle screamed for rest. That promise kept her fighting. Hour 16. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red that matched the blood-soaked compound. Jessica was down to her last magazine. 67 wounds marked her body, bullets, shrapnel, lacerations. She'd lost so much blood that her hands trembled even when steady, but she was still standing, still fighting. Then, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. 2 Blackhawks appeared over the ridge, Dr. Gunners already firing, suppressing the Taliban positions. A quick reaction force. They'd finally broken through. "Everyone to the LZ." Jessica shouted, her voice hoarse from screaming commands all night. "Now, move!" The civilians rushed from the building toward the makeshift landing zone, a cleared patch of ground 200 meters away. Adults carried children. The wounded supported each other. They ran through a hail of gunfire as Jessica provided covering fire with her last bullets. But Rasheed and Amira were last. Amira couldn't walk. Rasheed couldn't carry her alone. Jessica's ammunition ran dry. She dropped the useless rifle and ran to them. "Rasheed, climb on my back. Hold tight." She scooped up Amira in her arms, felt Rasheed's small arms wrap around her neck from behind. Together, the 3 of them weighed less than 100 pounds. But Jessica's legs barely worked. Each step was agony. Blood ran down her body in streams. The 200 meters to the helicopter might as well have been 200 miles. Taliban fighters, realizing their prize was escaping, concentrated fire on the fleeing Americans. Bullets kicked up dust all around Jessica's feet. She stumbled, nearly fell. Kept moving. Over her shoulder, Rasheed's small voice in her ear. "I'll be brave, miss. I'll be brave like you." That voice gave her strength she didn't know she had. She pushed forward. 30 meters. 20. 10. Hands reached from the helicopter. Soldiers pulling Rasheed off her back, taking Amira from her arms, dragging Jessica herself into the bird as the pilot pulled pitch and they lifted away. The last thing Jessica remembered before darkness claimed her was Rasheed's face, looking down at her as medics swarmed, his lips moving. "Thank you, miss, thank you." Jessica Walker died twice during the medevac flight to Bagram. Both times the flight medic brought her back. By the time they reached the field hospital, doctors counted 67 distinct wounds on her body. 4 bullets, 11 shrapnel impacts, 52 lacerations, multiple fractured bones, massive blood loss. She spent 8 months at Walter Reed Medical Center under an assumed name. Her identity was classified beyond top secret. Operation Blackwater had been so sensitive that officially it never happened. The 6 operators involved were listed as KIA in a training accident. Jessica Walker was declared dead. Her family held a funeral with a flag-draped coffin. Her name was carved into a memorial wall at Fort Bragg, But she survived, rebuilt herself, eventually took a new identity and became an ER nurse at Coronado Medical Center in San Diego, married General Thomas Reed, tried to build a normal life. She never forgot that promise, but she assumed she'd never see those children again. She was wrong. Rasheed Ahmadi, now 18 years old, stood in front of the newly built school in Kabul. The sign above the door read, Hope Academy for Girls, in both English and Pashto. He'd grown into a handsome young man, tall, with those same enormous brown eyes now filled with determination instead of fear. His sister, Amira, 16, stood beside him. She walked with a slight limp from her childhood wound, but she smiled as she watched 150 girls file into the school for morning classes. After they'd been evacuated from Afghanistan in 2014, Rasheed and Amira had been resettled in the United States, adopted by a kind family in Virginia, given education, opportunity, safety. But Rasheed had never forgotten the woman who'd carried them through hell, the American soldier who'd kept her promise. He'd tried to find her, searched military records, contacted veterans organizations, wrote letters. All he'd ever learned was that Staff Sergeant Jessica Walker had died in Afghanistan in October 2014. There was a memorial with her name on it, so he'd made a different promise. He'd go back to Afghanistan when he was old enough. He'd build a school for girls like Amira. He'd honor the memory of the woman who'd given everything so they could have a future. 2 years ago, he and Amira had returned to Kabul, started small, 10 students in a rented room. But word spread. More girls came. Donors helped. Now Hope Academy had 150 students, 5 teachers, and dreams of expansion. The Taliban, of course, hated it. Jessica Walker finished her 12-hour shift at Coronado Medical Center exhausted but satisfied. She'd saved 3 lives tonight: a stabbing victim, a car crash survivor, and a child with a severe allergic reaction. She was good at her job. Saving lives helped balance the scales of the ones she'd taken as a soldier. At 37, she'd found peace, or something close to it. Her husband, General Reed, understood her nightmares. Her colleagues at the hospital knew her as the unflappable trauma nurse who never panicked, never hesitated. No one knew she'd once been Delta Force. No one knew about Operation Blackwater. No one knew about the promise she'd made to 2 children in a compound in Afghanistan. Her encrypted phone, the one she kept for emergencies, the one that almost never rang, buzzed as she walked to her car. She looked at the caller ID, Langley. Her hand trembled as she answered. Walker. Master Chief, this is Special Agent Sarah Martinez, CIA Afghan Operations. We have a situation. Jessica closed her eyes. She knew that tone, knew what was coming. There's a school in Kabul, Hope Academy for Girls, run by 2 Afghan siblings who were evacuated in 2014 from Operation Blackwater. Rasheed and Amira Ahmadi. Jessica's breath caught. They're alive. Yes, ma'am. Rasheed is 18 now. He's been running the school for 2 years, teaching girls, building a future. But 3 days ago, the Taliban took him. They know who he is, the boy who survived Blackwater. They're going to execute him publicly in 72 hours as a message. Where's his sister? Safe for now. In protective custody, but she's asking for someone specific. She says her brother told her stories about an American soldier, a woman with green eyes who carried them through hell and made a promise to always watch over them. Martinez paused. Master Chief, that boy thinks you're dead. He's been trying to find you for 10 years. He built that school in your honor. Jessica stood in the parking lot, phone pressed to her ear, tears running down her face. Send me the intel package, she said quietly. I made a promise. I'm keeping it. Within 6 hours, Jessica's house had become an impromptu operations center. General Reed had made calls. Old teammates from other missions had answered, and surprisingly, a contingent from the Anchor Point bar incident. Master Chief Daniel Fletcher had flown in from Virginia. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, who'd once spilled beer on her, stood at attention in her living room. Captain Sarah Hayes arrived with tactical gear. Even the bartender Jake Martinez, former Army Ranger, had volunteered. They weren't active duty anymore. This was off books. Deniable. If caught, they'd be disavowed, but they'd all heard the story. The legend of Viper 1. The woman who'd held a compound alone against 300 enemies to save civilians, and they'd all seen what she was capable of. "This is a volunteer mission," Jessica said, addressing the room. "No orders, no official sanction. We go in, we get him out, we disappear. You can walk away. No judgment." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Ma'am, you kept a promise to those kids once. Let us help you keep it again." Fletcher nodded. "We're in, one by one," they all agreed. 12 operators, 1 mission, 72 hours. General Reed placed his hand on Jessica's shoulder, the one that still bore scars from that night. "Bring him home," he said quietly. "Bring them all home." The cargo plane touched down at Bagram Airfield under cover of darkness. Officially, it didn't exist. Jessica stepped onto Afghan soil for the first time in 10 years. The smell hit her immediately. Dust, aviation fuel, distant smoke. Memories threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed them down. This wasn't about the past. This was about a promise. The intel was solid. Taliban had Rasheed in a compound outside Kabul, heavily guarded but not impossible. They planned a public execution in the city center in 36 hours. Jessica's team had one chance. Hit the compound at night, fast and quiet. Get in, get Rasheed, get out before reinforcements arrived. They spent 12 hours planning. Every detail, every contingency, every exit strategy. As dawn broke, Jessica checked her gear one final time. Rodriguez approached her. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "That night, Blackwater. How'd you do it? How'd you keep going?" Jessica looked at him. "I made a promise to a child. That's all the fuel I needed." The assault began at 02:30 hours. No moon. Perfect darkness. Jessica's team moved like ghosts. Thermal imaging had identified 23 hostiles in the compound. Rasheed was in a basement cell. They breached simultaneously from 3 points. Suppressed weapons. Non-lethal when possible. Lethal when necessary. Jessica cleared rooms with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Muscle memory took over. She wasn't a nurse anymore. She was an operator. 4 minutes in, they reached the basement. Fletcher picked the lock. Hayes provided security. Rodriguez stacked at the door. Jessica was first in. The cell was dark. A figure huddled in the corner, tall, thin, clearly beaten. "Rasheed Ahmadi," Jessica called softly. The figure looked up. Even in the darkness, she recognized those eyes. Same brown eyes that had looked at her from an 8-year-old's face 10 years ago. "I am Rasheed," he said in English, voice hoarse. "But I do not know you." Jessica stepped into the light. Let him see her face. "I made you a promise, Rasheed. I always keep my promises." For a moment he just stared. Then recognition dawned. Not of her face, which he'd barely seen in the chaos of that night, but of her eyes. Green eyes he'd seen in his dreams for 10 years. "No," he whispered. "You died. They told me you died." "I got better," Jessica said, the hint of a smile on her face. "Come on, your sister is waiting. Let's go home." The extraction was clean. No casualties. By sunrise, they were wheels up, heading back to friendly territory. Rasheed sat in the cargo bay, wrapped in a blanket, still processing. Jessica sat across from him. "The school," he said finally. "Hope Academy. I built it for you. For what you gave me." "I know," Jessica said. "It's beautiful. What you've done, teaching those girls, giving them hope, that's the real promise kept. Not what I did. What you did with the life you were given." "Amira will not believe this," he said, tears streaming down his face. "She speaks of you still. The brave miss, she calls you. She tells all the girls at school about you. You can tell her I'm very much alive, and very proud of both of you." Rasheed reached out, took Jessica's hand, scarred and weathered from years of fighting and healing. "I said I would be brave like you," he whispered. "That night, do you remember? I remember everything about that night. I tried to be brave like you. To help people like you helped us." Jessica squeezed his hand. "Rasheed, you did more than try. You succeeded. Building that school, teaching girls in a place where it's dangerous to do so, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." Hope Academy reopened with additional security and international support. Word of Rasheed's rescue and the mysterious dead soldier who came back for him had gone viral. Donations poured in from around the world. Amira stood with her brother at the school entrance, watching 300 girls now file through the doors. They'd doubled enrollment. On the wall inside the entrance was a new plaque. "In honor of Staff Sergeant Jessica Walker, who taught us that promises are kept, hope survives, and courage means protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Below it, a photograph, the only one that existed, of a young soldier in tactical gear, face barely visible, but green eyes clear and bright. That soldier stood in the back of the crowd at the reopening ceremony, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding her eyes. General Reed stood beside her. "You should tell them you're here," he whispered. Jessica shook her head. "They don't need me. They never did. They had courage all along. I just helped them survive long enough to use it." Rasheed was giving a speech, his voice strong and clear. "My sister and I learned something 10 years ago. We learned that one person who refuses to give up can change the world. We learned that promises matter. We learned that hope survives, even in the darkest places." He paused, looking directly at where Jessica stood, though he couldn't see her through the crowd. "And we learned that some angels wear combat boots." Jessica smiled, tears running down her face behind her sunglasses. She'd made a promise to an 8-year-old boy in the middle of hell. 10 years later, that promise had become a school, a movement, a symbol of hope in a war-torn country. Some promises, she thought, echo across decades, and some are worth dying or living to keep.